So I'm sure you have, back to your quartet days, I'm sure you have countless incredible and humorous stories from your time in the Tokyo Quartet. But can you share how your relationship with those three musicians shaped you as a person and as a musician?
Yeah, well, the two of them came to Mile and Nine last week, which was
Yeah.
very touching for me. Um, they're extremely dedicated, um, wonderful musicians and incredible professionals. And I was very aware of that because in the years I was at Juilliard in the late 70s, the Tokyo Quartet was the shining star. It was only Seiji Ozawa and the Tokyo Quartet. Mitsuko Uchida was not heard of yet at that point, just beginning. So the sensitivity with which they played and the perfection, but also the color of sound and the deep emotions was very, very inspiring to all of us. So when I was asked to join the quartet, I was kind of baffled. And then I got to understand the individuals. I mean, there was something particularly special for me at the very beginning because my father was in the Second World War and all their fathers were in the Second World War, and they were not on the same side, if you know what I mean. When my father was in the British Army. And I thought there was something very magical about the idea that we were sitting down playing Bartok and late Beethoven and all this stuff together, and expressing ourselves for audiences all over the world, when just one generation previously they wouldn't have been able to sit, in the same room. Anyway, I don't want to overstate that, over dramatize that, but it did often occur to me. They're very different from each other, of course. Each one challenges you in a different way, and there are many relationships in a quartet. There are many one-on-one relationships. There's the relationship of one-on-two, and there's like three of those at least, and then there's a lot of things that go on, and then there's a unified relationship. So after a while, you begin to understand how people express themselves when talking about another, how they express themselves when they're talking about music. All of them have incredible strengths, and I always tried to focus on what I could learn from their strengths, because obviously you play in a string quartet, there are things that frustrate and annoy you. I mean, you're so completely intertwined. You can't even utter a word without the other three people. It's very strange, but it's very wonderful at the same time. And we cared so much. Funnily enough, Kiko and I were having this conversation because we used to disagree a lot, and he kept reminding me. He was sitting right next to me here, and Kazu was sitting here. We were having dinner, and he kept saying, we used to disagree a lot. And then I said, yeah, it's ridiculous. Then I listened to the recordings, and it's like, it sounds like we're completely unified. And he said, yeah, well, that's because we disagreed so much. That sort of thing. And you have to confront things, because if you glide over them, you're not going to have anything at the end. You can't let it be superficial. So everybody wants to find a conviction that is satisfying, and it's an impossible task because everyone's conviction is different. So working on this is really interesting, but also observing other quartets. I used to observe the Guarneri quite a lot, and because they were ostensibly very low key. We would play the Mendelssohn Octet with them, and I remember once we were rehearsing a passage and we stopped, and I think Kikwe said, excuse me, can I ask what he got his pencil out, said, what bowing are you going to be using in this passage? I like to match the bowing. And David Sawyer, the cellist, it was just so funny. He looked at us and said, what bowing? And then he said, hey guys, look, a professional quartet, they have pencils. I never forgot that. I don't think the Guarneri Quartet cared what bowings they did, because they could play anything, up bow, down bow, didn't matter, And so I observed that and thought, they're much more low key than we are, but their playing is amazing, And so different influences, and we learned a lot from Robert Mann, who was just the most incredible, philosophical, sensitive human being, and tough. But we learned all this before we were playing quartets. We studied with him individually earlier, and he'd probably taught the quartet when they were starting, but never with me. And I remember he came to a Carnegie Hall concert, and we were playing Opus 132, and I knew that the tempi we were playing 132 was quite different from anything the Juilliard Quartet ever did. So I was stupid enough to ask him afterwards. I said, "So Bobby, tell me what did you think of the tempo of the second movement of Opus 132?" And he said to me, "You do what you do." That was it. You do what you do. And it's like, okay, well, that's a nice way not to insult me, you know. So the relationships are very complicated, and Sadao, the cellist, has enormous strength. I mean, he's like the body of. So I'll tell you one story which actually tells you much more than I can tell you about my quartet. We were doing CBS Sunday Morning once. I don't know how many years ago, at least 25 years ago. Eugenia Zuckerman, was interviewing us, and this guy was behind the camera, said not a word for like 2 hours during the interview. And at the end of it, we were just chatting and this and that, and he was packing away his camera, and he was just about to leave the room, and he said, "Thank you very much." He pointed to Sadao and said, "You're the body." Pointed to Kazu and said, "You're the spirit." He pointed to Kiko and said, "You're the stability." And he pointed to me and said, "And you're the heart." And then he walked out. And I'm like, "My God, that was quite interesting." And it's not to say, by the way, that there's no spirituality in the other three, or there's no body in those other three, or there's no stability in the other three, or there's no art. But I thought, well, if he's really trying to say what makes the quartet work, I had never heard anyone articulate it so well. And every quartet has to have some elements that create a balance, a concoction, if you like, which ultimately goes, "Ooh, that works. It tastes good."